Yeah, as I say, I'm Tom, joined by Mike, and this this webinar is going to focus on cutting costs, carbon, and commutes. It's one of our net zero power hours, which we're running every month so far this year. We have another one coming up next month as well. This session is based on some topics that businesses have really wanted us to cover. So it's looking at emissions from working at business premises or working from home, and then looking at traveling, business travel and commuting. This one will probably be a power hour in name only. I don't think we're expecting this to last a full hour. There will be some time for some questions at the end. So, but please feel free to post those in the chat as we go along. But we'll probably wait till right at the end to get to questions. So the topics that we're discussing today, sort of working from home and traveling, they are in the most part Scope 3 emissions. There are some Scope 2 emissions in there. For those unfamiliar with what that entails, when you talk about carbon emissions, you have Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. The higher the scope, the less control the business has over their emissions. So Scope 1 would be fuel directly burnt on site, so things like gas for heating, any fuels burnt in a generator, any other fuels that might create an emission directly on site. Scope 2 is generally Scope 1 would also cover things like things like direct emissions from vehicles. So some Scope 1 for transport, certainly. Scope 2 is electricity generated off-site, and then Scope 3 would be products and services purchased. So where the emission is generated by somebody else, but you purchase a product or service where an emission has taken place, but it's not that business who has specifically undertaken the emission. So today's content will cover those aspects. We'll be looking at how workplace locations have changed and how working practices have changed in recent years. We'll look at where are you working and how the emissions are generated and can be lowered in those areas. We'll look at travel and transport, so business travel, logistics and third-party transport, and then commuting. How are your employees getting to your place of work, or how are you as an employee getting to a place of work? And then we've got a few case studies to look over. These will be focusing on the transport aspect of the webinar, and then we'll be talking about our upcoming power hour, which we've got at the end of March. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have some time for questions and answers if anybody's got any questions. So the first topic we're going to go over is working locations and carbon emissions. So as I'm sure we're all aware, ever since 2020, a lot of the practices and ways in which people are working have changed. A lot of people have either switched completely to work from home, or at least have some level of working from home in their daily lives. 39% of UK workers in 2023 now spent at least one day in the last 7 days working from home. So most businesses, or a lot of businesses, have got some kind of hybrid system set up. These have obviously affected different sectors in different ways. There are many sectors that it won't be possible to work from home. It's not feasible for lots of manufacturers or hospitality, for example, retail, lots of care sectors. It simply won't be possible to work from home. You need to be on location for those types of roles. But working from home does have emissions associated with it. So working from home is overall, on average, working from home does create lower carbon emissions for businesses than employees going into business premises every day. However, as this is an average across all businesses, this can vary. If someone most of this saving is from lack of commuting. So if someone walked to work and then generally speaking, their working from home may well not be too different to if they went into a business premises. But this is currently being quantified. There is definitely a saving from working from home, but there's lots of different organisations undertaking lots of work to actually quantify the exact level of saving that is being achieved by this shift to working from home. And DEFRA, who produce annual emissions factors, so you can calculate what certain aspects of your business operations generate emissions, have actually now included a working from home emission factor in their annual reporting. As this is something that is certainly being taken seriously on a governmental level as a ongoing impact for daily actions of businesses. So cutting carbon emissions, how can this be done at a business premises? Well, firstly, I'll just quickly do a little backwards plug to our previous Power Hour. We did go over some of the major changes that a business can take in order to reduce their carbon emissions on site. This is now available to view online. But further to this, the Net Zero Engage team are happy to have a conversation with any business who's looking to undertake any kind of project. We're happy to look at the viability in terms of carbon saving and in terms of cost saving that these projects would have. So, but this, when we're looking at it from the perspective of this webinar, when we're looking at cutting emissions at a business premises, often it's going to be things like behavioural changes. Now, I'm fully aware that these things are very cliche, things like switching off lights, setting up thermostats correctly, turning off equipment, and setting up power savings, not leaving screens on. The thing I would say is, we'll stop saying it when people stop doing it, and it's not something that's ever going to be made perfect. People are always going to forget to turn something off. It's going to happen. Nobody is perfect. It's not the case that everybody's going to remember at every single moment to be completely energy efficient, but it's more about ensuring that this is actually something within your business that is part of the culture, is thinking about energy saving, something that is part of the daily operations of your business. It needs to be a culture shift within the business to ensure that you are thinking about this. Treat it as it says on the slide, treat it as a bottom line issue, because it is for the most part. You will be saving electricity, you'll be saving waste. If you're reducing waste that's produced not printing something out, for example, that reduces the waste of the paper, and also not something that is currently in place, but something that may be coming down the line, things like carbon taxes. If carbon taxes are in place, then reducing your carbon emissions will be a bottom line saving. It will be a reduction of a cost for your business. And these changes, as always, we say with behavioural changes, it doesn't cost anything, and there can be immediate energy savings to be made here, and therefore reductions in emissions. Another way that you can reduce on-site emissions is through renewable energy contracts. We would also obviously advise to have renewable energy generated on site, but we know that this isn't possible or feasible for all businesses. The outlay and cost of installing things like solar panels or small-scale wind generation is not always feasible. Or if you're in a building that you don't own, or you're on one floor of a building, then it's not going to be possible necessarily for you to install solar panels or some kind of renewable. But in this case, there are things called renewable energy contracts, or often referred to as green tariffs. And this is where the electricity that is provided to your business will come from renewable sources. Generally speaking, these are for electricity, but you can also get them for gas, where gas is produced through anaerobic digestion. This is where waste is decomposed down into methane, which is the natural gas that is burnt through the gas network. And this reduces waste and allows this waste to be recycled and provided in a green way. As you pull energy out of the national grid, it may be that particular electron from the electricity supply was not actually generated from a solar panel or from a wind farm. So a lot of these contracts are backed by things called REGOs, which are government backed or Ofgem certified, and they essentially say that your energy supplier has generated this kilowatt of electricity via renewable means, but the actual physical electricity that was received to a business has come from the mix, and so may have been generated using fossil fuels or in non-renewable ways. But the overall energy that you pay for, that amount of energy, will have been generated in a renewable way. So, yeah. And if there's any questions on REGOs, we can happy to cover those as well. So, cutting emissions, working from home. So these will be much the same as a business premises. Obviously, there are the big things that you can undertake, such as glazing and insulation. This is for the employee rather than for the business to take care of those. So this is looking at emissions and energy saving for employees to undertake. This wouldn't be the responsibility of the business, but it's certainly something that the business can draw to attention of employees, although I think it would be the case that most people are aware of things like double glazing, improved solar panels on your home using domestic usage. So there's also things like zoning. So people might think of zoning where you have different zones of heating as something for a larger scale premises, but actually that can be used in your own home. This may be as simple as turning off if you're only going to be working in one space during the day, you turn off the radiators in that space throughout the day so that you aren't heating bedrooms or rooms that aren't being used while you're working from home. It could also be the case that small infrared panel heaters, which can heat a space that someone is working, could be provided by businesses, much in the same way that a laptop or a headset would be provided as a piece of equipment for an employee to use while they're at work. They could use that in order to reduce their heating bill while they're working from home. And then also things like people can also use things like hot water bottles. I certainly don't think this is something that should be suggested or told to people necessarily by employers. I think if your employer tells you, oh, you should sit without the heating on with a hot water bottle, it could certainly be taken the wrong way. But if it's something that as an individual you want to do, I know that sometimes I'll sit with a hot water bottle rather than have the heating on because I know that it can save emissions, but it's not something, isn't the sort of thing that you think an employer should be pressuring an employee to do. And then again, things like behavioural changes, these are the sort of things that will have an impact. Something that I didn't used to do, but my colleague Dan, who's not here today, often says is about not filling the kettle to the full. And it's something that within my household, I think we now have not arguments, but disagreements about is, if you're only going to be making 1 or 2 cups of coffee, you don't need to fill the kettle all the way. Kettle is a very high a very high wattage electrical appliance. You don't need to overboil the kettle. So that's a habit that I have personally developed in my life in order to reduce my energy usage. And things like not leaving company laptops in sleep mode. Very small amount of energy in a small period of time, but over a long period of time, over years, it's going to eat up a lot of energy within your house. And there's also actions when looking at half-hourly data. So we touched on this in our last power hour about looking at points in the day when more energy is being used. And again, we'd be happy to look at people's half-hourly data to map that out with them to see where there are hotspots, and if it can be determined what is creating those hotspots and where energy usage can be reduced. And again, there are also renewable domestic energy supply in the same way that there's green tariffs for businesses. There's also green tariffs for home supplies. And lots of these suppliers are already, their domestic contracts are provided by default, such as Ecotricity and Octopus. They provide fully renewable electricity to their customers. And on the very far end of the spectrum, it could be that, and there's case studies of this that we have seen, it could be that employers provide incentives to employees to go onto these renewable tariffs. They pay them annual subsidies to go onto this. Sometimes these green tariffs can be slightly more expensive, and so this can be taken on by the business. It wouldn't be necessarily a fact of paying per kilowatt hour because that gives businesses an open-ended cost, but it might be a one-off or annual payment that would be received by an employee in order to undertake this, in order to switch to a green tariff. That way, when a business is accounting for working from home emissions, they can say this employee or these employees, we won't need to count their emissions because from electricity, as we know that they are working in a renewable way. So many businesses, as I mentioned at the beginning, can't really be pigeonholed into one or two of these, into fully work from home or fully working from their business premises. And it would be really easy for us to focus purely on the environment here and say, oh, well, everybody, if they can, should be fully work from home. We completely understand that the importance of net zero adaptation and the shifting businesses should be shifted towards net zero, but it shouldn't be stifling businesses. If it's not sustainable to be fully work from home, then it shouldn't be the case that that's being done. It may well not be, may well not work for many businesses for many different reasons, and businesses shouldn't have to undertake that just for the sake of it. But when you have that hybrid approach, you do have to consider the aspects of having a premises and the aspects of working from home. So all the points that have been mentioned so far, if you have a hybrid model, they're all going to need to be taken into account when considering carbon emissions and behaviour in order to affect and reduce those carbon emissions. So now we're going to look at transport, and we're going to be looking at business travel, logistics, and third-party transport, and then commuting. So we'll first go on to business travel. So business travel, when we're in this aspect, we're talking about emissions from vehicles. So these are local emissions. If you've got a power plant, that's generally not going to be bang in the middle of an area where people are. It's usually going to be often quite out in the countryside. So those emissions, though emissions are global, will not be felt at a direct level. Emissions from vehicles are going to be local. If you've got high density urban areas or even suburban areas where there's lots of cars, you're going to see those emissions directly from exhaust fumes. And these are not just things like carbon dioxide, they're also other pollutants, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, which lead towards producing acid rain. There's also worse greenhouse gases such as dinitrogen oxide and methane. And there's also PM particles. So these are small particulates that come from exhaust fumes. They can also come from things like brake pads, and these can end up in the water supply. They can also end up in the air and cause issues for people with respiratory problems and health problems. About 1 in 5 people in the UK have got respiratory issues. So continued increased pollution within areas that people are inhabiting worse than this. And it's estimated that around 28 to 36,000 people a year die in the UK purely from air pollution. So this is something where the environmental issue really does move into a health issue as well for people, and a social issue. This map is showing the concentration of PM particles, so that's any particulate in the air that isn't a gas. So you can see where the hotspots are. They're sort of where you'd expect around London and in the more urban, dense city areas of the UK. And it's because of this legislation such as ULEZ, CAS, congestion charge, and then road tax based on carbon emissions of the vehicle are brought into place. So this isn't just about the environment and reducing emissions, but also being ahead of this legislation. We know we've spoken to lots of businesses where ULEZ has really been an issue and has really caught them out because the vehicles that they're using are charged within that remit, and it is causing a huge increase in ongoing costs for the business. So these punitive measures that have been brought in, it's good to be ahead of these before they come in. So what are some alternatives to traditional vehicles? So again, public transport, if it's available, it should be considered. And this is about a culture shift. It's not about demanding that everybody takes public transport or setting quotas for public transport, but it's about considering, is this journey feasible on public transport? Could this have been taken via public transport? It may well be that the culture within your business at the moment is purely focused on, I'll just drive, I'll take a pool car, I'll take my own car. But if that could have been taken by public transport, why wasn't it? Was it because it just isn't something that's within the company culture? It's important to be introducing this, and these are all sort of culture shifts that need to be introduced. Electric vehicles for the business. If a business has a vehicle, we understand there is a cost associated with replacing electric vehicles, both the actual vehicle itself, but also things like charging points. But these vehicles do have reduced maintenance, reduced car tax, and they future-proof against legislation and against the phase-out. Although climate action is urgent, we know that a lot of these actions will take place in the actual frame of decades. So it could be the case of that an EV will be the replacement vehicle for the current vehicle. It won't necessarily be about getting rid of the vehicle that you currently have. It may be about planning that the next vehicle, when it needs to be replaced, will be an EV or it will be a hybrid, and putting this into place for your future planning. These are long-term plans and long-term strategies for most and all businesses. Going ahead to the UK's target of being net zero by 2050, that's still a considerable amount of time away, where the businesses have more ambitious targets than that. That's fantastic. But even then, it may be the case of a decade, 2 decades for those time spans.
Can I just
also,
add in there?
yeah.
Tom, sorry. When it comes to actually calculating your emissions, a sort of good way to, if you were to send out an email survey to employees to find out the type of car that they're driving and the distance they're traveling into work, And even looking at things like Tom mentioned beforehand, the renewable energy tariffs at home. If anyone's got a renewable energy tariff at home, it will help us calculate your sort of scope 3 emissions a bit more accurately. So it's just a short little survey to send out to your employees just to work out what energy they're using at home and the cars that they drive and what they're commuting into work and how they're getting into work, some might be walking, some getting the bus. These all help us to calculate your emissions. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all good. Thanks, Mike. And yeah, the final point I've got on that is about alternatives to traditional vehicles. Can some journeys be avoided altogether? For example, today we're hosting this webinar online. It's not, again, to say don't do anything in person. It's great to do things in person. Sometimes in person is needed, and it certainly can detract from an event for it to not be in person. But where possible, if a visit doesn't need to be face to face, can be done online or over the phone or something like that. But again, not to put that ahead of the actual quality of the event or the interaction that you're undertaking. And the final point on business transport is air travel. So this is considered what's known as a hard to abate emission. It's something where there aren't really many alternatives other than very local international travel. If you're traveling to France, potentially the train could be an option. But if you're going to Asia, Africa, America, it's not going to be possible to make those trips via any other means other than air traveling. In this case, offsetting may be the only option. And I think I mentioned earlier that will be what our next Power Hour is going to be about. Is about looking at offsetting greenwashing where pitfalls can be seen. But this is certainly the case that international opportunities shouldn't be stifled by simply ruling out any air travel. Sometimes this is necessary, and at the moment, in the current climate, there are not alternatives that can be taken. So the next part of it is transport is third-party delivery and logistics. So delivery we utilise by almost all businesses and forms part of Scope 3. This is a service that you pay for, unless you have it in-house, of course. But this is generally the service that a business will pay for. And as with all activity, this is an aspect that would need to be considered under Scope 3 for carbon footprinting. So one thing to consider with Scope 3, because Scope 3 is the aspect that you have the least amount of control over, other than moving your services elsewhere, you don't actually have operational control over the businesses that you are hiring to undertake these, or that you're paying to undertake these actions. So things to consider are: do you know the carbon footprint of the journeys? Does your delivery service, does your courier provide you with a carbon emission per mile, carbon emission per journey? They won't be providing this unless people want them to, unless it's something that is brought in that they have to provide to every customer. The supply won't be there without the demand. So it's important that people that again, as a culture shift, we're asking suppliers, what are the emissions of your service? Do you offer low emissions alternatives to this? Do you have an EV delivery service, for example, that would be lower emission? Do you have EV that's powered by renewables? These are all things to be asking and building into procurement exercises when looking at third party deliveries. Another emission that is often considered hard to abate is freight emissions, so especially internationally. However, in the future, we've got things like electric heavy goods vehicles and hydrogen powered heavy goods vehicles. A lot of this technology is being developed and is being brought in, and something like the French company Airseas, who I believe in the news a few days ago, they were bought out by a Japanese freight company, who has seen the practical application of giant kites that will pull cargo ships across the ocean. So bringing back sort of old sail, in a way, a revolution in sail technology for giant cargo ships, can reduce emissions for those cargo ships by up to 20% using wind power to pull them across the ocean, and it looks exactly like it does in that photo there. Last mile deliveries, these are very intensive, carbon intensive deliveries. They're often very stop start in high density areas. This would cover things like food delivery, and often cars are left idling, people jumping in to grab the new delivery and then jumping out to provide it to the customers. Again, where possible, if there's bike deliveries or dedicated EV deliveries, this could be used for hyperlocal distribution. And I know within MK, there's often, they have the robots, which are renewably powered. So things like that, if they can be rolled out in other areas as well, there are ways in which last mile delivery emissions can be reduced. So commuting, now this is something that is very much out of the business's control in terms of employees will be deciding how they're getting to work if at the end point. But as Mike mentioned, it's great to be surveying people and looking at how are you getting to work. And this doesn't need to be a survey purely about commuting. It can be a survey, as Mike mentioned as well, around do you use renewables, and can focus on a larger part of a net zero discussion to really get the culture shifting and people talking about net zero within your business. Although this is not an emission the business, as I mentioned, has direct control over, it is an emission that the business has to take responsibility for as a scope 3 emission. So people should be helped, not forced, in order to reduce these emissions. So it might be just providing information to employees about where there are local transport links. It might be providing interest-free season ticket loans for public transport, operating cycle to work schemes. It could just be about encouraging carpooling or with travel partners. Again, none of this should be insisting, but providing the option for people. Within Milton Keynes, there is certainly good infrastructure for this. There's the Redways, which provide commuters with major benefit. There's huge numbers of cycle lanes that commuters can take in Milton Keynes. And things like MK Connect, ride sharing within Milton Keynes, reduces the number of vehicles on the road in a user-friendly way. So what are some programs, funding and support that's available for all these kind of activities? So as I mentioned, MK Connect is a scheme in Milton Keynes which provides non-fixed route travel. So it's like a lift sharing app, but it's provides virtual bus stops to bring people around Milton Keynes in a ride sharing, and it's hop on, hop off at virtual bus stations, which uses smart technology is used to calculate where people are going. If there's people wanting to take similar journeys, and then they group these people together and they drop them at a place close to people's destinations, but similar to a bus stop, not actually directly door to door. So this is something that's been, I may be wrong here, but I believe locally it's been a quite controversial topic, but nationally has won some rewards for innovation in local transport. There's the workplace charging scheme. If EVs is something that you are looking to purchase for your vehicles, or if EV charging points is something that you are looking to provide for your employees. So the UK government provides 75% grants towards the installation of EV charging points. It's not a cash grant, but rather it goes towards an approved installer. And this is capped at £350 per charging point for a total of 40 charging points per business. Net Zero MK, we are Net Zero Engage, and we run Net Zero MK, and we have one more carbon footprinting license meeting available within Net Zero MK. So
I'll actually put my email address in the chat if anyone's looking to take up that appointment, and just send me over an email, and I'll get back to you this afternoon.
Thanks, Mark. And finally, I know there'll be quite a few businesses here who are from Bucks. Their Bucks Council just launched their Bucks travel planning. So this looks at routes and driving methods for your business and your employees commuting, and develop smart travel journeys for those to be taken. So if there's any Bucks businesses who wanted more details on that, please get in contact with us. We can provide those and refer you over to the scheme. So now we're going to look at some case studies. These, as I mentioned, these are all around transport and improvements that could be made to transport to lower transport emissions. So this first case study is Wincanton, who they are a logistics fleet used by Screwfix, and they've actually committed to now replacing 85% of their vehicles to be powered by hydrogenated vegetable oil. So this would be waste oil from manufacturing and from food processes as well. And this will lower their greenhouse gas emissions and also their particulate emissions. So 90% reduction in CO2 emissions and PM particles reduced by 83%. So those PM particles, they're the things that can really produce respiratory issues for people. So to be lowering those as well as the CO2 emissions is fantastic. And this is following a trial that was successful in a small selection of vehicles that they undertook in 2022, but is now coming to full fruition, being rolled out across the fleet. And this has the added benefit as well of moving towards a circular economy where one business's waste can become product for another business. So this vegetable oil would have just been waste for a business, but can now be reused in order to power these HGVs in a more sustainable way. We have Spotless Garments. This is a business that Engage worked with. They had a diesel van which they used to drive around delivering laundered clothes to their customers. They want to replace this with an electric vehicle. This resulted, understandably, in lower transport emissions. And it also provides a nice bit of marketing as you're traveling. If you have a van or a lorry or something for your business, you can obviously put your name on the side of it and people know where you are when you're out and about. And the whole business of Spotless Garments was founded on the idea of increased sustainability and environmental awareness. So this was a sort of a no-brainer for them in terms of moving from a diesel vehicle to a lower cost, lower emission, low environmental impact electronic vehicle. And they were able to reduce their emissions by 3.7 tons of carbon per year, which is a large amount. Quite a few businesses that we have worked with have got complete annual emissions of around that. So it's a great saving from them on this project. And finally, a case study we have is My Milton Keynes, who are the business improvement district for Milton Keynes. So they offer the My Bus service, which is a shuttle bus service offered to 22 different businesses within the bid for employees to get to work as a commuting response to them. So in 2023, due to ongoing concerns of the emissions from their diesel vehicle, they replaced this with an all-electric bus to be launched on the service, and this has helped reduce commuter emissions for all these businesses. So this is the sort of thing that could potentially be potentially be undertaken by any businesses within a retail park, businesses local to your business, or even the owners of larger retail parks. This can offer a solution to reduce commuter emissions if it's something that's free and available to the businesses. To the employees of the businesses. So what have we got coming up in our next Power Hour? So the next Power Hour will be on Wednesday, the 20th of March at 10 a.m. So same time, same day, but different month, 20th of March. And this is going to be about avoiding greenwashing and helping to offset with confidence. I mentioned a few difficult to abate emissions where at the moment there are not too many options in terms of alternatives to reduce those emissions. So offsetting may be the only option. We see in the news sort of horror stories of offsetting schemes go wrong. I know there's a lot of trepidation around offsetting and also greenwashing. See businesses sort of misstepping on that, and people really want to be able to market their green credentials. They're undertaking these changes. They're reducing their emissions. They're improving their environmental impact, and they want to be able to market this without misstepping and being seen as greenwashing. And they certainly don't want to be offsetting, and then the scheme that they've offset with turns out to not have actually reduced the carbon emissions that they promised to. So we'll be walking you through how this can be done, what some things to look out for, what are some schemes that are safe to use, that are more guaranteed. So yeah, that'd be Wednesday 20th of March. Pop the link to that in the chat for you as well if people want to sign up to that. So yeah, thank you for coming. As I said, this would be a sort of Power Hour in name only, so finished a bit early there. But if we've got any questions, happy to take those now. Haven't seen any in the chat during, but if anyone's got any now, then that'd be great. Thanks. So So Donna's got a question. I'm just going to read through that. So most of our team have EV, which they charge at home on a combination of green tariffs and PVs. They would generally be at home alone during the day. So from an environmental point of view, would they use less energy if they were working in the office? For those who are using petrol, how far would they need to live away from the office before staying at home would be more emissions efficient? So in terms of the second part, I don't know the exact figure of how far they would need to be away for there to be a saving, but that's something that we can get back on. I'm sure that there will be a distance that, and it will also depend on the car, but again, we can use averages for that in terms of an average vehicle. If they charge at home with a combination of green tariffs and PVs, they would generally be at home during the day. So from an environmental perspective, it would depend on if they were heating their entire home. It may well be the case that if the office is in use, it may well be more environmentally friendly to come into the office in that case. If the way that they're getting in is completely renewable, and if they would be using a large amount of energy in the home that they wouldn't otherwise be using, it may well be the case. As I say, it's not going to be a one size fits all for working from home. It may well be the case that in some instances it is better to be coming into the office, and in some cases it's going to be far worse to be coming into the office. So yes, then I understand from that perspective, some of those people will be either the same or potentially worse off for working from home.
It's going to depend on the time of year as well. Obviously in the winter, if people are heating their whole home, whereas in the summer, if you've not got your heating going, then being at home is probably a bit more efficient.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got any more questions. If we haven't, we certainly can wrap up early there.